for this section, we are going to look at how to design different types of studies, more so how to identify a study that's already been designed. So there are two main types of studies that we're going to be looking at. The first one is an observational study. The second one is an experimental study. So there are two key pieces to both of these that we need to look at first. The first one is an explanatory variable, that is the independent variable. The second is the response variable, and that is the dependent variable. And it's important for us to identify these because that is one of the key characteristics that is going to differentiate the observational studies from the experimental studies. So the observational study is where the values of the variables or variables of interest are recorded as they naturally occur. We don't do any manipulation of variables. We just pick the variables we want to observe and we watch them happen. Or we ask for responses and we don't do anything to influence the responses. Okay, so there's no interference by the researchers who are conducting the study, and I went too far in my slides and I can't get back. On the other hand, an experimental study is one where the researcher does interfere with the values of the variables. I'm sorry if you just heard that noise, that was my cat. Anyways, the researchers interfere with the values of the variables. So they assign values of the explanatory variable to the individuals to see how changing those values affect the response variable. So experiments will usually involve at least two variables because they want to see how the changes of those two variables elicit different responses. So we're going to look at a case study real quick, and that case study is, will listening to music improve students' learning ability? So the response variable is students' learning. An observational study way to do this would be to interview the students and ask if they listen to music while studying and how it affects their studying, and then record the responses. If we wanted to do this as an experiment, however, we would split our sample into two groups. One group would study without music and one group would study with music. The students would be given the same exam based on the material, and then the scores would be compared between the two groups. So an example of how we could do this with an observational study and an experiment. So here's another example. Determine which type of study is being used in each scenario below. The first one, you recruit participants for a study. While they are presumably waiting to be interviewed, half of the individuals sit in a waiting room with snacks available and a TV on. The other half sit in a waiting room with snacks available and no TV, just magazines. Researchers determine whether people consume more snacks in the TV setting. The second one, recruit participants for a study. Give them journals to record hour by hour their activities the following day, including when they watch TV and when they consume snacks. Determine if snack consumption is higher during TV times. And then I believe I have one more. Yes. And then recruit participants for a study. Ask them to recall for each hour of the previous day whether they were watching TV and what snacks they consumed each hour. Determine whether snack consumption was higher during the TV times. So I would like you to pause the video and think about these, write down your answers, and then I will go over them in just a moment. All right, hopefully you did what I asked. You paused the video, you read these over again, you thought about what the answers would be. You didn't move on to the next slide, which I believe has the answers, so I can go over them really quickly. So the first one would be an experiment. This is an experiment because we're splitting up the two groups and we are changing one of the variables to see how the response changes. One group has a TV, the other one does not have a TV. And we are looking at, does changing whether or not they have a TV impact how much food they consume? The second one is an observational study. We are not changing anything about their habits. We are just asking them to record their habits, and then we are taking those observations and looking at how much they consumed when they were watching TV. And then the last one is also an observational study because, again, we are not changing anything between any one. We don't have any groups or anything that we're doing anything with. We are just asking them to recall when they were watching TV and what snacks they consumed. Oh, I didn't have the answers. Okay, cool. So another thing that we have with experiments are blind and double-blind experiments. So a blind experiment is conducted, I'm so sorry if you can hear background noise. My cats are going crazy. A blind experiment is conducted when the individuals in the experiment do not know which group they are in. So you are chosen to be in an experiment, and you do not know whether you are in the treatment group or the control group. And the control group is used as a control. You are used as a baseline to determine whether the treatment is working or not. So if it's for a medication, you are given a similar looking medication, but it doesn't have any of the active ingredient in it. It's a placebo or a sugar pill. So you don't know that you've been given the sugar pill because to you, it looks like the regular medication that everybody else who's in the treatment group got. A double-blind experiment is conducted when the individual in the experiment and the researchers who are administering the treatment don't know which group people are in. So the researcher who is overall running the experiment, they know who is who, they have to, but the person who is giving the medication or has split the people into the groups and is saying you go here and you go here, they don't know who is going into the treatment and into the control. They just have the list and they're following the directions from the researcher. So the doctor doesn't know if the pill that he's giving you is a placebo or not. He's just giving you the pill, and for all he knows, it's the correct one. When conducting these randomized, controlled, double-blind experiments, the results can be used to conclude that the explanatory variable has caused the change in the response variable, and that's a very important word there, caused the change. Let me say that one more time because of my cats. It caused the change. When we don't have a randomized, controlled, double-blind experiment, all we can say is that there is a correlation between what we saw. But we cannot say that this medication caused this to happen unless we go through the randomized, controlled, double-blind experiment. Lurking variables. Lurking variables are so much fun. They are variables that are not in the explanatory or response variable. They're another variable that has a relationship with the response and the explanatory variable. So they are a variable that we are not testing, but it is somehow affecting the relationship. It's not in our study, but it's influencing that relationship anyways. So an example of a lurking variable from the case study we did earlier would be how much knowledge does the person have of whatever subject we're having them test on before they even came in? That's a lurking variable. Also, the type of student could impact the results. We said we were going to give them material to read and then have them take a test on it. Not everybody learns by reading. Some people need to do something with the material before they're able to really learn it to be able to be tested on it. So those are two things that we're not at all thinking about. We're just like, oh, let's see if the type of music or if the presence of music affects their ability to learn. But we're not even thinking about, do they know this subject before they come in? Or what type of learner are they before they come in? And then the other one is confounding variables. For some reason, the slide doesn't have thingamabobs. This is a variable that is in the study, and it's related to the other study variables, and it has a relationship on these variables, and it confounds the results. So if a lurking variable is included in the study, it could have a confounding effect and then be considered a confounding variable. So if we did think about, oh, maybe we should take into account the knowledge of the subject beforehand and try and pick something that people don't really know that well, but we don't do a whole lot of foresight into it. We're just like, you know what? People probably don't know that much about ancient Egyptians. So let's just go with that. And then we happen to have somebody who knows a lot about ancient Egyptians in our study. We thought we controlled for it. We thought we dealt with it, but we didn't. So it's still having a confounding effect. So a more concrete example of a confounding variable is the type of music that we're asking people to listen to. That could confound the results. So we have this study where we've got people in one room with no music, people in another room, they get to listen to music. But what type of music are they listening to? That could have a big impact on their ability to learn. Me personally, I cannot stand jazz music. I want to, I can appreciate the musicality it takes to go into it, but I just cannot stand the sound of a trumpet. I really can't. I don't know why. But you give me like lo-fi hip hop music, I can study all day long with that in the background. Okay? So you give me the right type of music and I can study, but you give me the wrong type of music and I will not be able to focus at all on anything but how much I dislike the music that you're playing. Also, you play something with words and then you ask me to read, not happening. I cannot. So, those types of things are also things that you would have to keep in mind when you are doing this type of study. Other people are fine having music with words while they're trying to read. They can tune out the words in the music while reading the things on the paper. I'm just not one of those people. So, those are confounding variables. So, they're in the study and they have an effect on the relationship, but they're not necessarily something that we are taking into account versus the lurking variables are not in the study, we're not thinking about them, but they're still having an effect on the relationship that we're seeing. So those are studies, observational studies, and experiments.